The rain fell slowly that night, painting thin silver lines across the windshield of a car parked at the edge of a quiet Indianapolis street. The hum of streetlights buzzed above, casting a pale yellow glow on the puddles that gathered near the curbs. Inside the car, a man sat still, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His name was Herbert, and to the world, he was a respected father, a businessman, and a charming member of his community. But under the neat smile he wore like a mask, something monstrous lived. He looked across the empty street, his reflection flickering in the rearview mirror. For a brief second, his eyes softened as if he questioned everything he was about to do. Then the softness disappeared, replaced by a cold, practiced calm. He checked his watch, 11:42 p.m. It was time. At the same hour, across town, the nightlife was just waking up. Music pulsed through the walls of a downtown bar, laughter spilling out into the wet streets. Among the neon signs and blurred faces, a young man named Roger leaned against the counter, talking to a stranger who introduced himself as Brian. His smile was kind, inviting, and his voice carried confidence that made people trust him. Roger didn't know that Brian was just another mask Herbert wore, the side of him that hunted. They talked for almost an hour. Drinks, laughter, harmless flirting. Then Brian leaned closer and said softly, "I've got a pool at my place, quiet, private. You should come for a swim." The way he said it sounded casual, safe. Roger hesitated for a moment but then nodded. He didn't notice how Brian's eyes never quite matched his smile. The drive out of the city grew darker with every passing mile. Streetlights thinned, replaced by the whisper of trees and the soft hum of tires on the road. Roger felt a small pulse of unease but pushed it away. The man beside him seemed so normal, almost too normal. He didn't know he was being driven toward Fox Hollow Farm, a house that looked beautiful in daylight but hid secrets in its shadows. When they arrived, the property was silent except for the rustling of wind through the grass. The house was big, its windows dark. Brian guided Roger inside, turning on a few dim lamps. The living room smelled faintly of chlorine. The pool was down the hall, glowing a ghostly blue under low lights. Roger's voice echoed softly. "You really live here alone?" Brian smiled. "For now." He handed Roger a drink, then walked toward the pool. For a few moments, everything seemed normal, the sound of water, laughter, and small talk. But when Roger turned to look at him again, Brian was no longer smiling. There was something empty in his eyes, something that made Roger's breath hitch. "Do you trust me?" Brian asked. Roger tried to laugh it off, but the question felt wrong. The air grew colder, heavy. He started to step back, but Brian moved closer. Moments later, the pool rippled violently. The laughter was gone, replaced by muffled sounds that no one could hear over the hum of the house. By morning, the property was quiet again. Brian, or Herbert, sipped coffee at the same table where his family often sat, staring out the window as if nothing had happened. His wife and kids thought he was just tired from work. He smiled at them gently, the perfect husband. Inside, he was thinking of the body now hidden where no one would find it. Over the next weeks, more men disappeared. Some from the same bars, some from the nearby highways. Each story ended the same way: they met a friendly stranger who promised safety and adventure, and they never came back. But one person survived, Tony Harris. He remembered the strange feeling that something was wrong the moment Brian took him to that house. Tony had noticed the mannequins in the pool area, positioned as if watching. He remembered the strong smell of decay hidden beneath chlorine. And when Brian asked him to play a breathing game, Tony knew he had to escape. That night, Tony pretended to go along. He smiled, acted calm, and when Brian looked away, he ran, barefoot, terrified, gasping as he reached his car. He told the police everything. But they didn't believe him. They said it sounded like a story from a movie. It would take months before anyone realized Tony had seen the real face of Herbert Baumeister. And as more men disappeared into the shadows of Indiana's highways, Herbert's double life began to crack. His wife started noticing strange things: the smell from the backyard, the long nights, the unease that followed him everywhere. One night, she went into the garage and found something she couldn't explain: a pile of burned bones mixed with ash near the corner. She confronted him, and his calm answer chilled her more than the bones themselves. "They're just old chicken remains," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She didn't argue. But she couldn't sleep that night either. When she finally called the police, she didn't know she was uncovering one of the darkest serial murder cases in American history. The days following Roger's disappearance blurred together under the gray skies of Indiana. The city moved on, but the whispers in certain circles grew louder. More families reported their sons missing, young men who had gone out for a drink or to meet a friend, only to vanish without a trace. The police barely reacted. In their reports, the words were always the same: likely left town, no foul play suspected. But beneath those dry phrases, something terrible was building, a pattern hiding in plain sight. Tony Harris couldn't shake the images from his mind. Every night, he replayed that terrifying visit to the strange man's home. The mannequins around the pool, their lifeless eyes reflecting the dim blue light, haunted his dreams. The sound of water dripping echoed in his ears long after he left. He had gone to the police, but they treated him like a fool. "You sure you didn't just have too much to drink that night?" one officer had said, laughing. Tony stopped trying to convince them, but deep down, he knew he had come face to face with evil. Meanwhile, Herbert Baumeister continued to live his perfect suburban life. By day, he ran his thrift store, Save-Lot, smiling at customers, cracking jokes, helping his employees. People liked him. He was odd, yes, but harmless, or so everyone thought. By night, when his family was asleep or away, he became someone else entirely. The charming businessman turned predator. His wife, Julie, began to notice things she couldn't explain. Herbert's long drives at night, the strange smell that drifted from the property, the way he guarded certain parts of the farm. Once, when she tried to open a locked door in the basement, he snapped at her with an anger that frightened her. "Stay out of there," he said sharply, then quickly softened his tone. "It's just storage." But she could see something in his eyes that didn't belong to the man she married. One summer afternoon, Julie took her children to visit her mother. Herbert stayed behind, claiming he had work to do. When she returned 2 days later, the house felt different. The air was heavy. Outside, near the edge of the woods, she noticed patches of disturbed earth. When she asked about it, Herbert smiled and said he'd been burying trash. But Julie couldn't shake the feeling that something inside those shallow pits wasn't garbage. Around the same time, a detective named Mary Wilson was quietly piecing together the cases of the missing men. She noticed something others had ignored: the disappearances seemed to center around certain bars and highways. Many of the victims were last seen getting into cars with a man who matched a vague description: tall, thin, sandy hair, polite but distant. A few witnesses mentioned that he called himself Brian Smart. The name stuck in her head. Wilson decided to reach out to Tony Harris. She listened carefully as he told his story again, this time in detail: the drive, the house, the mannequins, the game. Every word painted a clearer picture. When he mentioned the location, a large property north of the city, Wilson felt a chill. It matched an area she had quietly flagged in her notes. Tony agreed to help. He began visiting the same bars, hoping to see Brian again. Weeks passed with nothing. Then, one night, he spotted him. Herbert was standing at the counter, nursing a drink, scanning the crowd like a fisherman watching the water. Tony's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. He watched the man leave, then followed him outside. As Herbert's car pulled away, Tony noted the license plate. The next morning, he called Detective Wilson. That single act broke the case open. The plates led straight to Herbert Baumeister, the friendly businessman with the perfect family. When police began investigating, they found cracks everywhere. Reports of strange behavior, missing persons traced near his store, financial problems, and a history of mental instability. But none of it was enough for a warrant, not yet. Julie's unease grew into fear. One evening, she confronted Herbert about the rumors. "They're saying police are watching us," she said, her voice trembling. He shrugged. "Let them watch. I've done nothing wrong." But that night, she couldn't sleep. She got up and walked out to the garage, flashlight in hand. Near the back, she saw it: bones. Small, gray, half-burned bones mixed with ash. She froze, unable to breathe. When Herbert found her standing there, he didn't shout. He just looked at her, eyes empty, and said softly, "You shouldn't be here." Julie took the children and left the next morning. She drove to her mother's and called the police. The moment Detective Wilson heard her name, she knew everything was about to unravel. By the time officers arrived at Fox Hollow Farm, Herbert was gone. His house stood silent beneath the wide Indiana sky, hiding the horrors buried beneath its soil. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the scent of chlorine and decay. The mannequins stood by the pool, watching the dark water ripple as if waiting for their master to return. When they began to dig, they found bones, hundreds of them. Some burned, some broken, some so old they crumbled to dust when touched. Forensic teams worked day and night, gathering pieces of lives that had been erased. News of the discovery spread fast. Reporters camped outside the gates, flashing lights cutting through the night. The whole nation watched as one man's secret world was exposed to the daylight. But Herbert Baumeister wasn't there to see it. He had already vanished into the distance, driving alone through the countryside, the radio humming quietly as if nothing had changed. Inside his head, though, the voices never stopped. He saw their faces, every one of them, and whispered apologies that meant nothing. To the world, he had been a husband, a father, a businessman. But to himself, he was something else entirely, something that could no longer hide. The summer heat weighed heavy over Indiana, pressing down on the fields that surrounded Fox Hollow Farm. The media had turned the once quiet estate into a national obsession. Police tents covered the property. The sound of shovels striking earth echoed day and night as forensic teams uncovered what was left of more than a dozen lives. Each discovery brought both answers and new questions. Detective Mary Wilson stood near the edge of the property, watching officers carry evidence bags toward the waiting vans. Every bag looked the same, sealed, anonymous, but inside each one was a person's story. Someone's brother, someone's son. She had seen terrible things before, but this was different. The scale of it was monstrous. The numbers kept growing. 17 sets of remains were confirmed within the first week, then 20, then more. They found skull fragments inside flower beds, ribs scattered in the woods, vertebrae near the creek behind the property. It was as if the earth itself had been forced to swallow what Herbert Baumeister wanted forgotten. Inside the house, investigators catalogued everything: photographs, VHS tapes, newspaper clippings, clothing. But one room stood out above all: the indoor pool. The air was thick with chlorine and silence. The mannequin still stood there, arranged neatly, frozen mid-dance beneath the soft blue glow. The surface of the water rippled slightly, disturbed only by the motion of the air vents. Officers didn't speak in that room. It felt sacred, cursed. In the small town nearby, people whispered about ghosts on the property. Locals said that at night, they could see shapes moving along the fence line, hear faint music echoing through the trees. Some swore they saw figures standing near the pool house, their outlines flickering like shadows caught between worlds. But it wasn't ghosts haunting Indiana, it was guilt. The guilt of everyone who ignored the signs for so long. Julie Baumeister watched it all unfold from a motel room 2 towns over. The TV screen flickered in the dark, showing aerial shots of her home surrounded by flashing lights. Her children were asleep on the bed beside her, their small faces pale with confusion. She turned the sound down and pressed her hands together, whispering a prayer she barely believed in. The man she thought she knew was gone, replaced by headlines that said serial killer and monster. Meanwhile, Herbert had driven hundreds of miles away. His car moved like a ghost through backroads and highways, always just out of sight. He stopped at gas stations, bought coffee, spoke politely to strangers who had no idea they were talking to one of America's most wanted men. He slept in his car sometimes, staring up at the stars through the windshield. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him felt relieved. It was over. The pretending, the hiding, the constant hunger that ruled him. But that relief came with the crushing weight of inevitability. He knew there was no going back. Detective Wilson issued an alert across multiple states. The net was closing fast, but Herbert stayed ahead by hours, sometimes minutes. He never used credit cards, never called home. His silence made him harder to trace. Yet the walls of his life had already collapsed. His business partners distanced themselves, his family name destroyed, and his face appeared on every major news broadcast. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains of Ontario, Herbert parked his car near a wooded rest area. He stepped out, feeling the cool air brush against his face. The world around him was calm, too calm. Birds called in the distance. The sound of a river hummed nearby. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. He sat on a picnic bench and pulled a notepad from his pocket. The handwriting was neat, controlled. He wrote letters to Julie, to his children, to anyone who might still care. They were apologies, though they rang hollow even to him. He claimed he couldn't face what he had done, that it had all spiraled beyond his control. In the final letter, he wrote one line that police would later read over and over again. "I am sorry for everything, but death seems like the only way to silence the noise." The next morning, a group of hikers found his body lying beside his car under the trees. The gun was still in his hand. The police report listed it as a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Just like that, the man who had haunted Indiana for nearly a decade was gone. Back at Fox Hollow Farm, the investigation didn't end with his death. Detectives continued identifying remains for years, using DNA testing to return each name to the nameless. Families who had spent years searching finally received answers, though none of them found peace. The horror that Baumeister left behind was too vast for closure. But even as the case closed, whispers about Fox Hollow Farm continued. People claimed to see lights inside the windows at night. Paranormal investigators began visiting the estate, reporting strange phenomena, voices on recorders, cold spots, and laughter echoing through the empty pool room. The property was eventually sold, yet no owner could ever truly escape its past. Detective Wilson retired years later, but she never forgot the faces. Every time she drove past the county line, she felt that familiar weight, the knowledge that evil had lived quietly among them, wearing the mask of a neighbor, a husband, a father. And though Herbert Baumeister's story ended beneath the trees of Ontario, the darkness he left behind still lingers in the soil of Fox Hollow Farm, breathing softly through the cracks in its walls, waiting for anyone who dares to listen. The world moved on, but Fox Hollow Farm did not. The years rolled by, seasons changed, and the house stood still, silent, watching. The trees grew thicker around the property, their roots curling into the soil that still carried fragments of the dead. Wind whispered through the empty pool house at night, stirring faint echoes of laughter that never belonged to the living. The land was eventually sold to a new family, one that believed in second chances. They thought they could rebuild, cleanse the space of its horrors, and start anew. They brought light to the old house, fresh paint, repaired floors, music that filled the halls. But light doesn't erase shadows, it only makes them deeper. At first, the new owners dismissed the small things, the creak of footsteps when no one was there, the faint hum of static from the pool's sound system, the smell of chlorine drifting through locked doors. But the unease grew stronger. Visitors spoke of a heaviness in the air, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. One night, the owner's teenage son stayed awake watching television in the den. The rest of the house was dark. He heard the faint sound of water splashing, gentle at first, rhythmic, like someone swimming slowly. Curious, he followed the sound down the hallway, his bare feet cold against the floor. When he opened the door to the pool room, the air hit him, damp and freezing. The water shimmered in the pale blue light. He saw ripples, though nothing moved. Then, just beneath the surface, a figure appeared for a moment, a pale shape, like someone floating face down, motionless. The boy stumbled back, gasping, but when he looked again, the pool was still. Empty. He never told his parents exactly what he saw, only that he didn't want to go near that room again. But he wasn't the last. Others who visited spoke of the same blue light glowing at odd hours, of laughter that echoed faintly through the vents, of whispers calling their name. Word spread quickly, Fox Hollow Farm was haunted. Paranormal teams came with cameras and recorders, hoping to capture proof. Some left shaken. One investigator claimed that in the reflection of the pool, she saw faces, dozens of them, watching her from beneath the water. Another swore that when he asked, "Who's here with us?" a voice answered, "All of us." Despite the stories, some refused to believe. To them, the haunting was nothing more than trauma echoing through imagination. But others knew better. They understood that places remember. Pain imprints itself on walls, on air, on the smallest grains of dust. Fox Hollow Farm had absorbed too much of it to ever rest. Detective Mary Wilson, now retired, returned to the property once more. She walked the grounds quietly, her hair silver under the fading autumn sun. The tents were gone, the noise replaced by birds and wind, but she still felt the same chill. She paused near the edge of the woods where the first remains had been found. A small plaque stood there now, simple and clean, engraved with one line. For those who never made it home. Mary placed a single white rose beside the plaque. She didn't speak, didn't cry. She just stood there, listening to the wind move through the trees. Somewhere behind her, the house creaked softly, almost like it was breathing. She turned, half expecting to see a face in one of the windows, but there was nothing. Just the quiet stare of the house that had seen too much. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the fields turned gold. For a brief moment, the property looked peaceful, almost beautiful. But those who knew the story understood what beauty cost here. Beneath the soil, the past still stirred, whispering its secrets to anyone who cared enough, or foolish enough, to listen. Even now, years later, visitors say the air feels different on Fox Hollow Farm. Colder. Heavier. The birds go quiet when you walk too close to the pool house. And if you stay long enough, they say, you might hear music, soft, distant, echoing from nowhere. The same kind that once played when the mannequins danced under the blue light, and the laughter of the living mixed with the silence of the dead. Because some places never forget. And some ghosts never leave.